What do you mean by digital modesty?
Oh yeah, that's an idea I've been playing with a lot recently, which is really just about where we've got to with the exposure of everything on the internet. This is something I've found myself thinking about a lot more, and the more I found myself writing in public and speaking in public and really sort of being present online, whether it's on Twitter or wherever, which is there anything that we shouldn't be posting? And the more I think about that, the more I conclude that yes, there are absolutely things that we shouldn't be posting, or rather, if there are things which, if we do share them, we should expect negative consequences to follow from that. I mean, the more I've thought, I've derived a set, I guess, of basic principles for what I won't post. I won't post selfies online. I mean, I'll post, my face is all over the internet, right? But in the context of a conversation, you know, you and I are here we're not here to talk about my face. I mean, my face is just my face. We're here to exchange ideas and to have a conversation. But I won't post selfies. Yeah, I remember the point where I realized that I didn't want to post selfies was just after I ran over the finish line of a marathon a couple of years ago. And I trained for it and I trained for it and I trained for it and I'd worked so hard at it. And at that point, I think I had maybe 10,000 followers on Twitter, and I took a photo of myself having crossed the finish line, looking like hell, completely exhausted and high as a kite on endorphins. And I nearly pressed send, and then I was like, "Whoa, don't do that! Do not do that!" And I deleted it, and I did not post the selfie of myself having just crossed the finish line.
Why?
Because I realized if I did, like probably 75% of the people who follow me would say, "Great, well done, congratulations," and I get lots of love. The other 25% would be the people who hate follow. Because they exist. Once you get past a certain point, you have haters on the internet, because like people can hate anything. You know, that's just the law of the internet. People will find something insane to hate, even if it's just people doing, like, middle-aged women doing marathons. And then there would have been one mean comment which would have just crushed me, and it would have ruined my day. And I thought, what's the easiest way of not experiencing that one mean comment? It's just don't post the picture. But it's more than that. It's also that it exposes something intimate and personal, which I realized was just not something which was. It wasn't for everybody else. It was my that moment was for me, and it was for my family and for the people who'd supported me. It wasn't for and for the people who'd supported me to fundraise. It wasn't for general consumption. And I realized that actually there is a boundary. And I've spent more time online. I've appeared in public more since then, and the more I do it, the more I've come to think that actually we need. The more exposed you are potentially online, the more intentional you have to be about thinking clearly on where you draw the line.
Like a digital hijab.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't use. That would be a problematic way of putting it in public, because I think there are borrowing from other people from a faith which I don't personally espouse as a metaphor.
Digital modesty will do. Okay, so no selfies.
So no selfies, no pictures of my home, no pictures of my child, no pictures of my husband, no discussing my husband, my child, or my home, except in the most general terms, and really no discussing intimate matters from my social life and my family life and my home life, unless it's in the most general terms or with the consent of anybody else involved. Because ultimately, like, these by virtue of being relationships, they're things which don't just belong to me. And because it doesn't just belong to me, I can't mine it. I have no right to mine that for content. Justify
for the non-content creator people why a degree of digital modesty is also a good idea.
Okay, so the more I thought about digital modesty, the more I realized that what we're actually talking about is setting boundaries on the culture of transparency. And this is really something which I think we've inherited from the 1960s and the sort of hippie utopianism. And this idea that, if we all let it all hang out, if we're just open about everything, if we all just share and we're honest and we're authentic, then somehow everything's going to be better. And that might have been true. Maybe that was true to an extent before the internet, because there was a limit on what you could share. But now we have the internet, we could theoretically be documenting literally every moment of our lives. And on those those people who've tried documenting literally every aspect of their lives online have generally ended up in some pretty horrible places. I mean, I can't remember the name of the guy, but there was a famous subculture. There was some guy online who documented literally every aspect of his life, and he ended up getting trolled, and he basically went to some very dark places and ended up, in profound kind of, really sinister kinds of audience capture.
It wasn't Nikocado Avocado, was it?
I mean,
Wait.
he's a more recent case in point,
Right,
actually.
okay.
I mean, people who end up sort of, crying and breaking up with and getting back together again with his boyfriend whilst eating enormous plates of food, basically for internet clout. There's a sort of race to the bottom aspect there. But more generally, even for people who are not professional internet presence havers. The culture of the culture of transparency and the sort of tyranny of transparency has negative effects. And I was thinking about this, but like in the context of dating. I mean, periodically you see these TikToks which young men or women put out where they're like, oh, I point of view, you're on a date, and they're literally filming the date while they're on the date, and then they're criticizing their counterpart on the date while they're actually doing it, or they've gone to the loo to make a TikTok about how their date is going wrong while they're actually having the date. And I'm thinking, well, if you never draw a line and say, if you arrive in a sort of potentially intimate situation, you always got that imagined audience in your head, which is potentially everybody on the internet. How are you ever supposed to create a shared intimacy with anybody? And I was thinking, so it's like transparency is not just the enemy of desire. Transparency is the enemy of intimacy. It's the enemy of relationships. And if there's nothing, if there's no gap at all between what you'd say on main and what you'd say in private, there's intimacy is just meaningless. It's not a thing.
One of my friends who I came up doing club promo with, he was in Southampton and I was in Newcastle running the same event, Carnage, which was an event where you bought a T-shirt as your ticket and there was tasks on the back like pulled a pig, got off with 3 randoms, swapped shoes with somebody, etc., right? Very sort of mid-noughties, Larry British drinking culture stuff. And I was asking him where he thought that the Larry culture, which although maybe not exactly like emotionally healthy, is a kind of liberated licentiousness, which kind of speaks of a degree of transparency and honesty and truth. Like, I'm just going to do what I want, right? I'm not going to perform. And where that had gone, where like the Larry, like, pulled randoms in a club type thing, because that's not what happens. We see...
Doesn't happen anymore.
No. And he said it's because of this sort
the
of...
imaginary audience.
Stasi surveillance state run by gullible volunteers, which is everybody with a phone in their pocket.
Yep, exactly that. There's no, you can't do pranks. You can't have a crazy night out with your friends anymore. I mean, we threw some completely bonkers parties when I was late teens, early 20s. I remember the absinthe and laughing gas party, which I can only remember kind of in bursts, and that was a magical evening, which are unforgettable and also unrememberable. But there's absolutely no way that could have happened, any of it, if camera phones had been a thing at the time. And I'm thinking, there are a huge number of benefits that come there. There are new kinds of communication, there are new forms of relationship. I mean, you and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to one another if it wasn't for this phenomenal technology that we have that brings people together in some ways. But if we're not able and willing to set boundaries on what we will and won't share, then it will eventually scoop out everything that's inside us and leave us no scope for intimacy or interpersonal connection at all.
Ultimately, everything becomes performant. Everything's content. Yes. So I had a conversation with George, my friend, earlier on, and we were saying I had an aversion to taking photos for a while because given my Love Island alumnus status, I had seen a lot of people who did photos, and I'd associated every time you take a photo of yourself or what you're doing or wherever, that is you shilling yourself for content on the internet. But that's not true. People took photos way longer before social media existed. So I had associated the only reason for taking a photo is to post it online. Therefore, I won't take a photo because I don't want to be one of those wanky Love Island people that post all of their life online. But that caused me to not post my life online, which I wasn't going to do anyway, but also not take any photos of the fun stuff that I was doing. So I've got these huge dearths of my life where I don't have photos of me and my friends doing stuff. I went for lunch with Douglas the other day. I wanted to, I was like, I want to remember this. I want to remember the pink shirt that he was wearing and the fact I had Crocs on and just like stuff. And I'm like, okay, let's take a photo, but I have to get over my own fear that I'm doing it for content, even though I know I'm not going to post it. It's like I go like fucking projecting myself into the future that I'm not a part of.
But is the stuff that you would just categorically never photograph?
No, I would, it would be like times with friends, like I'm on a hike with some friends or whatever, but I'm in nature and I feel like I'm supposed to be like, I'm primitive man here and I shouldn't have my phone out because it feels gauche somehow to do it or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, here I am at the top of the mountain, but it's not. It's here I am with my friend that I've just taken a hike with and I really want to remember this, or maybe I'll frame it and put it on my wall at some point or something. Like that seems like all of that stuff's a good idea. That's a good use of technology up until the point at which you everything becomes an OnlyFans for yourself?
I don't know. I'm possibly slightly more radical than that, in the sense that, I think about when I run a lot. So I'll run.
Red flag.
Well, you lift, I run. It's just, so I run a lot, and one of the reasons I run is because I can't do that whilst simultaneously scrolling. Like the reason,
but you can lift. Actually, you can do it in between sets.
The reason I obsess about all of this stuff is because ultimately, like I'm so hardwired to the rage machine. Like I'm so plugged into the internet, which is why I find myself kind of wrestling with the outer limits of it at all. And one of the reasons I run, and one of the reasons I treat that as absolutely sacrosanct space in my life, is because it's physically impossible to do that while simultaneously scrolling. And I have an absolutely cast iron rule for myself that it doesn't matter how beautiful the scene, doesn't matter how gorgeous the sunrise when I've gone for like a 2-hour dawn run and I'm out in the middle of nowhere, I will not stop and photograph it. I will not stop and record that, because I don't want to allow space for that imaginary audience.
But see there, again, there's no reason. I understand why you do that. I think that's a noble set of rules to set for yourself. The reason that has happened is because of the social media side, not because of the photo side. Let's say that you had a beautiful photo album of all of the beautiful sunsets that you'd ever seen. It is, again, this sort of crossing over of the barrier of not just this is for me, but that there is something inbuilt into technology that kind of it gets into me. And if I open my phone, oh my God, what if I see a fucking notification from Twitter and then I'm sucked into a scroll hole and my entire run is ruined and stuff like that. I'd say it's a shame that something which can be, my videographer's got this real special sort of point and click camera that is very low friction, and he bought it specifically, even though he had all of the kit in the world, but he bought this very specific camera which is just point and shoot, and all it does is that. And he bought that to remove the friction and remove the performative nature of this. So I just think it's an interesting blend. But you were talking before about how people who put a lot of themselves online, they can have unforeseen repercussions. I guess if a lot of people are clustering together over their political opinions, and if you even pseudonymously post hardcore political opinions on the internet, eventually the person that you're potentially looking to date is presumably going to get exposed to whatever it is that you do online. And if you are if you're fucking Bronze Age pervert or something, it's like, oh, all right, and now I have this entire other side of you that needs to be folded into our dating pool. And I learned from Scott Galloway, in 1960, 1 in 25 parents had concerns about their child marrying someone from the opposite political party. By 2018, almost half of Democrat parents and a third of Republican parents had such concerns, and a third of each party sees the other party as an enemy. So given this sort of clustering around political opinions, more than many other things, and a lot of people doing the pseudonymous, anonymous shit posting online thing, you are potentially creating a future in which your entire mating pool has been restricted by opinions that you had 6 months ago, and you've got the choice between either lying to somebody about your shit posting online thing or trying to somehow fold that into a conversation that they can be accepting of.
I'm not even sure how you resolve that. I mean, I'm fortunate. I'm immensely blessed in that my husband and I met some time ago, and this has just never really been, before you
were an opinion sprayer.
Before I was a professional opinion haver, a long time before I was a professional opinion haver, and really long before political polarization was anywhere near its current level of completely batshit crazy. So, I mean, it was completely academic, and honestly, Chris, the advice I give to anybody who's single and extremely online is date somebody who's just not very online. You can only have one very online person in a relationship, except in the most unusual circumstances.
Yeah, not two.
Because, and anecdotally, from younger friends I know who are also opinion havers, whether anonymously or under their own faces, anecdotally, it's a real problem. Because, well, I mean, quote one right-wing anon who I chat to periodically, who shall remain nameless, told me that, I mean, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but essentially, he has a real problem, because he says if your choices between an e-girl, a right-wing e-girl, and they're generally they can be on the unstable side, or somebody who doesn't know anything about your opinions, in which case, how on earth are you going to explain what you do, what you spend all day doing online? And furthermore, what's going to happen when she finds out about your opinions on the internet?
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to be great. Like, it's a real problem. So like, how are you supposed to form any kind of a genuine, mutually satisfying relationship under those circumstances? I don't know the answer. I mean, I suppose I come back again to digital modesty and the idea that we have to reserve some space for intimacy, which is protected from the imaginary audience that we have on the internet. And actually, I think in some ways, what the anons do is wise in that sense, because by virtue of being anon, they've already drawn a very clear boundary. You know, they said if you want to stay, if you're anon and you want to stay anon, there's a whole swathe of stuff that you just can't share. You can't really post anything about where you are or what you do for a living, or or anything that's too close to what your day-to-day activity is. And so that creates, just by it's a very blanket way of setting some boundaries on what you're willing to share. But for the rest of us, it's a real challenge knowing where to draw those lines and where to protect where to protect what's just yours and what belongs to you and the people you love.
Yeah, Douglas taught me a couple of years ago, keep your private life private.
Yep.
And I think, one of the things that people can see is that relationships and makeups and breakups and the vicissitudes of your personal life can be a very effective wedge to begin levering to be able to create an audience, right?
Yeah,
it's the same as every person who decides to call out some other internet commentator and have an argument with them. That's a very effective way to garner
eyeballs.
Attention and eyeballs. But at what cost? What does it say about you? What sorts of conversations does it open up?
The machine always wants more.
Yeah, correct.
Doesn't matter how much you feed it. The machine always wants more.
If you think that having a relationship is hard, try having a relationship with a couple of million people who are also invested in the outcomes of your relationship.
Right. Every so often I see, I see anons with a bit of a platform, report that it somehow comes out that the two people who have a bit of a platform are having a relationship with one another, and all of a sudden everybody cares and everybody wants. And I'm like, why am I even invested in this? I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe it's just a byproduct of being otherwise relatively atomized and feel like there's a basic human need to sort of feel like you have a wider community.
I wonder if a little bit of it is kind of like who wins in a fight between Batman and Superman. It's like who gets into a relationship.
Please say more. I don't know what you mean.
Well, you've got two people, both of whom you know individually, and they are now in a relationship together. And you go, oh, what happens if these two worlds collide or something? Yeah. Brett Cooper got engaged the other day, and she announced on the internet that it was like the back of her fiance's head, maybe the side of his arm and his shoe or something. And it's like, this is the first and last time that the internet's going to see a part of like my husband's body, fiance's body. He's not interested in being famous, and I really like him for that. And that's what you've got there. It's like a one-sided internet relationship. And she did a little bit of time talking about it, and now she's just going to move on. But yeah, you got to be careful. And again, to kind of sing the song for the people who don't have a following or a desire to monetize it or any of the other things, it is a genie that does not go back in the box. Toothpaste does not go back in the tube, because once there are photos of things that you have on the internet, the place that you live, the kids that you have, like little stuff like, if you take a photo of your kid in their school uniform on their first day of school, guess what? That school uniform identifies which fucking school they go to. So yeah, very, very interesting. Talking about this, I found a study that I think is kind of associated. A survey was sent out breaking down whether participants of different political ideologies would refuse to date a current OnlyFans worker and an OnlyFans subscriber. Percentages of participants who would not date a current OnlyFans worker: left-leaning 43, moderate 63, right-leaning 84. Percentages of women who would not date a current OnlyFans subscriber: left-leaning 70, moderate 78, right 84. So right is 84 for both, but there are way more left-leaning people who would date an OnlyFans worker than would date an OnlyFans subscriber. And I think that says kind of quite a lot about some of the signaling that people on the left are looking to do at the moment, that like sex work is real work and you can like monetize yourself as you wish. But there is still an inherent ick from women to the men who are a part of that ecosystem.
I would be curious to hear like what the methodology was and whether there was any effort to control for preference falsification.
How so?
Well, I mean, when you think about what orthodoxy is on the left, particularly around sex work is work and yada yada yada, I'd be willing to bet that there would be a subset of people who asked, would you be willing to date an OnlyFans worker, would lie. Even if they weren't actually, even if honestly, if you asked them in the pub privately off the record, they'd be like, yeah, no, that gives me the ick. If you asked them in that sort of a context, they would give the morally approved answer for their political tribe, which is, oh yeah, that's fine, sex work is work. Or I don't know, maybe some of them genuinely don't care, but I'm willing to bet that it's a higher proportion actually of men on both sides of the political spectrum who don't actually find that appealing.
What do you learn about the wouldn't date a current OnlyFans subscriber thing?
Okay, so the difference between, like a guy who's addicted to porn is fundamentally low status, and I think it's considered morally acceptable across the entire political spectrum to dunk on lonely like masturbatory horn dogs. That's like nobody cares about them. That's incels are low status.
Yeah.
The
perverts and the porn addicts.
Yeah, the simps, the perverts and the porn sick like losers. Like nobody cares about them. Everyone's happy to dunk on them. So there's less of a pressure to preference falsification. Whereas women in the sex industry have a much heftier architecture of sort of moral hectoring around them, at least on the left. So that would be my read on what's going on there. Preference falsification.
What did you learn after the release of the Barbie movie? Did you reflect on sort of what that did culturally?
Did it do anything culturally?
I think that there was an awful lot of conversations around what true feminist power, feminine power means, and whether or not there is still this sort of rampant patriarchy that is kind of keeping women down and so on and so forth. And then there was the right-wing reaction, and there was the left-wing re-reaction to the right-wing reaction and all the rest of it. So I thought it was interesting. If anything that Ben Shapiro needs to do a 45-minute video about, like after he's watched Dressed as Ken, I thought was an interesting, I thought it was an interesting opportunity.
My favourite read on the Barbie movie was that it was a straightforwardly reactionary text, and that it was and that it was arguing fundamentally against feminism, and arguing fundamentally for women as for the embodied differences between men and women, and that there was nothing progressive or feminist about it at all.
How so? What would you say to the people who are like, how could you say this? It was obviously was pushing back against men, and men were on the receiving end of all of the jokes, and they laughed at them and all the rest of the things.
But pregnant Barbie was expelled from the Barbieverse. I mean, there's no darker commentary on the boundaries of liberal feminism. I mean, this is what I spend my entire professional career harping on about, Chris. Is the fact that liberal feminism has a mother-shaped blind spot, and it's right there in the film. It's as though even if it was meant as a liberal feminist text, it's a liberal feminist text that's telling on itself in a sort of compulsive verbal diarrhea-ish way, and this is the reactionary read of the Barbie movie. I mean, I suppose you could say that it's in the like a good piece of art is never a straightforward piece of political propaganda. It doesn't work. Like good stories are never straightforward moral lectures. Good stories always contain the other perspective, and good stories are always just more complicated than that. But I mean, even if it was intended as a piece of feminist propaganda, it told on itself in some powerful ways. Including by that detail of expelling pregnant Barbie from the Barbieverse.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything that you need and nothing that you don't. It's a healthy alternative to sugary electrolyte drinks, and it is the best way that I have started my morning every single day for over 3 years now. It contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, or any other junk. Your adenosine system that caffeine acts on isn't active for the first 90 minutes of the day, but your adrenal system is, and salt acts on your adrenal system. So if you want to be more awake, want to regulate your appetite, curb cravings, and have better brain health, this is the way to start your day. Head to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom to get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box. Plus, there is a no BS, no questions asked refund policy, so you can buy it 100% risk-free. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. Modern wisdom. I was talking to Louise about the unobvious ways in which our culture is anti-family. I didn't get round to actually finding out. I just harped on myself. What would you say some of the ways that people might not realize that culture could be anti-family?
Well, I can give you a very straightforward anecdote. So I don't live in London. I live out in the boonies. I've travelled into London with a toddler in a pushchair, and occasionally somebody will help you up and down the steps on the tube with your pushchair. Sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. But like nobody will really give you the time of day. Nobody looks at your kid. I'm not sure that I could explain why. I've also travelled into London with a dog. Everybody wants to talk to your dog.
Right.
I mean,
is it not just that dogs are better than humans across the board? Like your daughter's beautiful and very lovely, but it's impossible to be better than a dog. I think that's the way it works.
You only say that because you don't have kids.
True. Fair enough. Look, here's the thing that I've also realized. Dog walks past you. A dog is kind of like, it's the world's pet. It's not your pet because you are allowed to go over and tap it on the head and what's your name and blah, 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 blah. If someone, presumably, it might be nicer if more people acknowledged your daughter as she walked by, but if they started coming over and patting her on the head and
because if in other countries
feeding
that
it
actually
treats.
happens. I mean, maybe not the feeding treats, but in other countries, like people respond to a random child completely differently. You get warm looks, you get interactions from strangers. It's only in Britain that people are like, "Oh, I must not look at your child." And I don't know that I don't fully understand the psychology behind not looking at somebody else's child or not wanting to even acknowledge that there's a little person in the vicinity. But there's something very distinctive about it.
Do you wonder if it's like the nonce radar thing that people are so concerned of being seen as like some latent sexual predator?
There is, for men, that's definitely a factor, and I know that because I've spoken about it with male friends and peers who who confirmed to me that they'll be very cautious about interacting with mothers and children in a public setting because they're terrified of being labelled in that way, and I think there's something really toxic about that, and something.
Well, I've found, I think I've told you this, that over the last few years, my paternal instinct has started to kick in, and children have gone from being super annoying and lame to like kind of cute. So, but I see a child now, like let's say it's like some little girl's being walked along by her mother or father or whatever in the park near where I live, and I'm like, I grin at whoever go over the top.
I'm like, I'm going this way. Okay.
And I'm like,
this is huge.
Yeah, well, it's enough water. You're a highly performance athlete. And I like have a grin at the child as they walk past, and I'm thinking, oh fucking hell! Like I'm the strange man. I'm like the 30-year-old man
with a pocket full of Werther's originals.
Precisely correct.
I know it's really dark. It's really dark. It's really dark. And the total number of noncings today is no higher actually than it was 20, 30, 50 years ago.
Right.
If anything, but the level of panic is so much greater.
Right. So the anti-child accepting and pleasantry culture isn't helping to reduce the noncing rate. It's just making life lonely. Mothers and kids like kind of more lame.
I mean, it's difficult. I don't know that I'd be cautious about drawing clear causal lines between those things, and whether the stranger danger and all of that panic is a cause or an effect. I'd be hesitant to speculate without a bit more data, but. None of it helps you to feel any more part of a community when you're existing in public with a child, let alone multiple children.
Right, yeah. Does it feel alienating a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's particularly palpable when you've got very small children, because I mean, once your kid is in school, you're sort of you're kind of part of an ecosystem at that point. You know, you're part of the school mom's WhatsApp group, and you're part of a community, and you know there are events you go to, and you see the same kids around at brownies or whatever, and so after you sort of start to fit in with a fabric of other people, and you do realize that actually if you live in a small town, as I do at least, you know that if you're fortunate enough to live somewhere like that, then that something of that fabric is still there, even if you do have to go looking for it a little bit. But when you're a very new mum, particularly when it's your first, or in my case, my only, it feels like you've just fallen off the edge of the world into somewhere completely different. And old women will smile at you on the street, but pretty much nobody. It's very hard to establish where you fit at all. Apart from that,
there's a lot. Going back to kind of, I guess, Barbie's cultural commentary. There's a lot of talk about the crisis of masculinity at the moment. If I was to make a prediction for the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I think that I would project out that there will be a big crisis of femininity coming down the pike, at least a little bit. I think that it can't be the case that women continue to grow up, because there is a dearth of good male role models, but the female role models are no better. The only difference is that they're allowed to be on TV more, that they get more airtime, and that when women have problems, there is a little bit more mainstream sympathy.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I suppose I would frame it very slightly differently. Like the problem as I see it it's not necessarily just a crisis of masculinity or a crisis of femininity. It's a total crisis of embodied humanness, which hits the sexes differently, and which is downstream of having developed a culture in which almost nothing about our physical bodies makes very much difference at all. At least if you live if you do a knowledge-based. If your occupation is in the world of information, I mean, if you're an oil rig worker, obviously, like your physical body matters a lot, to an extent. If you do something physical, but that as a proportion of the economy has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking with deindustrial first with the deep rural depopulation as agriculture industrialized, and then with the with deindustrialization as the second tier of that. The number of people who do manual work has been shrinking with every generation, and the number of people who work in the world of information has been growing. And I mean, if you work in the world of information, it doesn't matter what shape your body is.
Gender neutral occupation.
Yeah, exactly. They're all gender neutral occupations. In theory, any of us could be driving a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter, and
driving a spreadsheet. And
arguably, I mean, the same goes arguably to a great extent for the being a professional opinion haver. It doesn't matter what sex you are.
Yeah, the keyboard wielders can be the same sex.
Right. It doesn't matter. And there's a concrete question which confronts all of us in that context, which is, to what extent do our bodies even matter? And I think really this is what the gender ideologues are pushing at from the opposite direction. That they're making a very strong statement that what shape my body is doesn't matter, so much so in fact that I'm entitled to remodel mine as I see fit, and building a whole political platform on the basis of that premise, but everybody is confronted with the same question. Even people who are not signed up to the whole sort of meat Lego worldview, everyone's confronted with the same question. If I'm driving a spreadsheet or being a professional opinion haver, like what difference does it even matter? Who cares? Who cares what shape my body is? Is masculinity, or what does it mean to be a man or to be a woman when we're all just disembodied heads on the internet? I don't know the answer to that, but I grapple with it every day.
Well, it's definitely something I think that people grapple with, and ultimately, given that work is maybe one of the most important things that you do, that might contribute. But there will be times where your biology and your predisposition smash up against your nature and the experiences that you have in life.
I completely agree. And I think this is what it would benefit all of us to be talking more about and to be leaning more into. And I mean, sometimes I see people making early attempts at that, or sort of trying to find ways into that. You get these sort of ridiculous kind of trad subcultures, for example, who are trying to find ways to be men and women in a sort of post-human age, which is really kind of what we're talking about here. And it kind of doesn't work, and it's kind of cringe. And often, I mean,
what would be an example?
Well, I mean, okay, so backing up a bit, so there was a real, like, among the alt-right in particular, this is something which I've been reading into a bit recently. Among the alt-right, between sort of 2016 and maybe 2020, there was a real boom in influences of both sexes, but actually quite a lot of young women who were calling for pushing back against the kind of modern degeneracy and saying we should all re-embrace traditional gender roles, and we should have more sort of traditional set-up relationships, and that we could fight back against the collapse of everything in that way. As it turned out, a lot of the women who actually tried doing that just absolutely hated it, or at least the relationships were really messed up, and it turned, a lot of the relationships were abusive. And there are women who are coming out of that now, having survived an alt-right attempt at a trad relationship, who are just massively beaten up and traumatized by the experience, and who are now this sort of unhinged kind of subset of like post-alt-right radical feminists.
What was their experience of the relationship like?
Well, I mean, if you want an example of somebody who went all the way through one variant of this, you should look up Lauren Southern's story.
Okay.
I mean, without wanting to make any comment on her opinions or her political trajectory, but I mean, she went through something along these lines and ended up living in a trailer park with a toddler. Having married somebody who was possibly a Fed. It was
That's
all
full
very,
horseshoe.
yeah, right. I mean, it was absolutely crazy arc, and having leaned all the way into being a kind of alt-right, trad, anti-feminist influencer, she ended up as a single mother living in a trailer park, and is now I don't know what she's doing now, but yeah, I mean, there are a great many people who sincerely tried to kind of re-synthesize something like the old way of men and women interacting, and have found that it just blew up underneath them. And I don't know. For all I know, there are relationships who formed and which are still flourishing, but there are a lot of others that went extremely wrong.
What is it that's blowing it up?
I don't know. I honestly, I think like trying to reverse engineer a set of social sex differences without the material underpinnings which created those different sexed social norms is just it's a fool's errand, honestly. What,
like, can you get specific?
Okay.
Like vague but specific.
I'll have to come at this from the other direction. So one of the themes I've written about in Feminism Against Progress is those ways in which, like, men and women have both always worked. At least up until the beginning of the industrial era, men and women always worked. Both sexes did, and they did so complementarily. Ivan Illich writes beautifully about this in Gender, which I strongly recommend as a book if you're interested in the deep history of the relations between the sexes. And he writes about how in pre-modern largely agrarian life, men's work and women's work were always different, and what constitutes men's work or women's work will vary depending on the context. But they're always different, and they're always defined in relation to one another, and they're always ambiguously complementary. He describes it as like the relationship between your right hand and your left hand. They always know where they are in relation to one another, and they're not the same, but they mirror one another and they work together. And that's the nature of men's work and women's work in a pre-modern
harvesting and processing,
right,
for instance.
Exactly. And there are even down to the language used, down to the kind of the social spaces occupied, even down to the kinds of tools which are considered acceptable for one sex to use rather than the other. And he describes villages where it would be considered deeply humiliating for a man to touch the tools that would be normally used by a woman. It was just completely
touch that
unthinkable.
Fucking rolling pin.
Exactly. It would be utterly unthinkable.
Get off my pestle and mortar.
For one sex to touch the tools which are reserved for the other.
How interesting.
And so this is and that emerges out of a material context in which everybody needs to work in order for survival in order for life to happen. And what happened, as the world has industrialized and we've entered, I mean, what he calls the transition from vernacular gender, which is the ambiguously complementary world of men's work and women's work, into the world of economic sex, which he describes as more sexist than the world of vernacular gender. Because although life is less gendered in practice, by pretending that everything is unisex, you end up with women being structurally disadvantaged because tacitly the default becomes the masculine one. And this is the world. This is what Caroline Criado Perez talks about when she in another great book, Invisible Women, where she writes about how so much of the built environment and the physical environment and tools and norms and medical defaults and crash test dummies and all surgical instruments and so on are all constructed for a male default, and the women's distinct physiology, and which is subtly different, and in some biomedical contexts extremely different, is just quietly rendered invisible. And this is really what Illich is talking about when he talks about the more sexist nature of economic sex, because by pretending that men and women are interchangeable, it effectively renders women invisible.
You've got a male default. You also, interestingly, I guess, when you move across into the world of mental health, you're looking at a female default. I
think that's very true.
Therapy interventions.
Just bringing this back to the question of why trying to reverse engineer ambiguous complementarity in the world of economic sex. Now that we've got that vocabulary in place, I can maybe explain what I mean when I say it's a bit of a fool's errand. Because in a sense, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. We can't go back to the world before modernity. We're stuck with it now. We're stuck with this world in which everybody's pretending that men and women are interchangeable, and to a significant extent in the world of bits and bytes, we kind of are. And under those circumstances, circumstances to say, well, we're just going to decree that we're going to have a pre-modern division of sex labor within our private home. I mean, it can work. Like for some people, it kind of does. But I think you just need to be a little bit less doctrinaire about it. And anybody who sets out to be rigidly ideological about it is setting themselves up for a toxic dynamic and potentially domestic abuse.
Yeah,
I mean, in practice, if you ask most heterosexual married couples, any of them will tell you that there are jobs that he does and there are jobs that she does, because that's just how it falls out and because you both prefer it that way. I mean, I could give you...
it's like, what's that?
Were it not for digital modesty, I could give you examples from my own family, but I'm not going to.
It's like the specialization of labor. Almost, right? But domestic specialization of labor.
But there are instances in my own family where the division of labor is counterintuitive. If you were coming at it from a rigid doctrinaire point of view, it wouldn't be the way it is. But it works that way because we both like it that way.
So moving forward, in that case, we should return to a tradcon history in the future. Is that's just a dead end as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think we just need to be a bit more attentive to where we are. And I think we can afford to be a little bit more respectful of the dynamics within individual couples. I mean, it's generally like there are patterns which emerge, in any given heterosexual couple, that's been together long term. There'll be things which are more typical of the male partner and things which are more typical of the female partner. And and that's fine. We shouldn't be trying to fight against those stereotypes if they're what works for people. But I don't see much point in imposing kind of you should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that. Because ultimately, people
need
work
guidelines.
out.
People do need guidelines.
But people, people can figure out what works best for them. I mean, here's one example. So, talking in very general terms, I mean, I've made the argument that the problem with trad wives as such is that they're just not trad enough. In the sense that what they're harking back to is a sort of mid 20th century template, which was actually only true for a very small subset of the middle class, and which is distinctively modern, because in pre-modern times all women worked, pretty apart from the very, very richest.
Right. So you're saying
the idea of
send it further back, agrarian, grab your pestle and mortar and hoe and get working.
So the question I want to ask is what does a 21st century version of the pre-modern productive household look like? The house, where the basic economic unit is your household, and so you've agreed you're all in it together. You're there for the long term. Everything that you do for the team, and then it's just a matter of agreeing of figuring out how to get the best out of everybody. And I can't. I'm not interested in legislating for any given couple what that looks like. And in a modern context where most of us work in the world of bits and bytes anyway, I don't know. I can't make that determination for you.
Yeah.
But there will be a way. When you form your household and you make your decision about how you can get the best out of your productive household, there'll be a pattern. And I think there's no shame in accepting that sometimes that can fit into a more traditional mold.
What was that insight that you had about women needing to develop a strategy for not having it all?
Well, I guess that's just a variation on talking about productive households. Because I mean, again, in Feminism Against Progress, the analogy I've given is weaving, which I think it's a very powerful illustration of what happened to women's work at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. In that, for some sort of 10, 20, 30,000 years prior to the Industrial Revolution, weaving was always women's work, and there are solid practical reasons for that. Weaving is something. I mean, a household needs textiles, right? You don't have textile factories. Somebody needs to make textiles. You need them for clothes and you need them for all sorts of different things. So somebody's got to do the weaving. And somebody's also got to look after the kids. Happily, weaving and looking after kids are fairly compatible because you can raise a loom off the floor. You can put down your repetitive. You can do it whilst keeping an eye on, toddlers or small people running around. And it's interruptible and it's social. So it's ideal work to be getting on with while you've also got small children underfoot. And so for millennia after millennia, weaving has been women's work. But weaving was also one of the first industries to move out of the home into factories. And at that point, it was much more difficult for it to continue to be women's work. And those working class women who went to work in the textile mills had real dilemmas on their hands, because what are you meant to do with your breastfed baby? And there are horror stories about how women tried their best to cope with that. Babies drugged with opium, or left to starve, or left in the inadequate care of there's awful stuff. And then there are those women who respond by just saying, okay, fine, we're not going to make the textiles anymore, so we're just going to focus on different stuff. But the point is that weaving is a fine example of the kind of work which in pre-modern times took place within a productive household. And I suppose the question I have is, what kinds of work, like, let's say you want to be a mum, and let's say you've got small children around underfoot, what's the equivalent work that's a bit interruptible, that's a bit social, that's a bit you can pick it up and put it down again?
That's not what people think about when they think about have it all, though, right? You
can't have it all. Come on. Everybody knows that. Well, they ought to. Mm-hmm. Like, enough feminists prior to me have leveled with the world. You can't have it all. You can have a lot, and you can have a great time doing it, but you can't have it all of the time, all at once. You have to do some things one after another.
Louise said that she worked it out, and she was doing 40 hours a week of breastfeeding, like a more than full-time job of just that part, just that one vertical underneath the child having process.
Yeah. And that's not something you can outsource, because it's not just food. There's the foundational layers of your child's
mother making, child making,
foundational aspects of your child's capacity for self-regulation and your child's capacity for being an integrated person are laid down in those early interactions. It's not something which can be subcontracted.
Do you think that
profoundly important work?
This was something that Mary Eberstadt said to me. She thinks that motherhood's a mimetic desire, at least in some regard. That one of her answers to the birth rate decline is that fewer mothers beget fewer mothers.
I think there's some truth in that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think, I'm trying to think, how many babies did I ever hold before my own? Not very many, to be honest, if any. It's possible that the first baby I ever held was my own, or if not the first, certainly very close to the first. And I was in my late 30s. Yep. You just think, this is crazy. There was not even that long ago, there was a time when you'd have been left holding younger siblings or other people's kids, or you'd have been around little babies, and it wouldn't have been frightening in the same way. But it's one of the reasons middle class older mothers like me sit there with our late stage pregnancies frantically consuming baby books, is because we don't have that practice around us anymore. Because families have got smaller, and extended families have got more scattered, and extended families have got smaller as well. So as Mary so eloquently explains in her, she writes a lot about the shrinking of the family and the atomizing effect that has, and the loss that imposes on everyone.
Adam Lane Smith's got this thing about how don't forget that moving out of the house at 18 is a PsyOp by the mortgage industry to turn one family into two homes.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you can make the same argument for the divorce industry. There are genuinely opinion pieces out there from divorce lawyers arguing that divorce is good for the GDP, which it is.
That's interesting. I mean,
it's kind of dark.
Mia Khalifa, very famous porn star, said, marriage is nothing sacred. This is a recent video she put up. Marriage is nothing sacred. It's just a piece of paper. If the person that you're with isn't helping you grow, you need to let them go. Obviously, Mia Khalifa is a paragon of successful relationships. And
I would respectfully disagree with the sentiment.
And I just thought, I had this really, really great guy, and I'm going to send you the episode when it goes up, this dude called Mads Larsen, and he tracked all of the different Western mating ideologies over time and how they were adaptive for the particular cultural time. And he goes through, the agrarian, the romantic, and he calls the one that we're in now the confluent era.
I mean, the coinage which I've used in the book it's not actually my coinage. I forget the sociologist who coined it, but the self-expressive marriage, which I think is a very good, and really what the quote from Khalifa that you just offered is a perfect expression of the self-expressive marriage. This idea that your partner is a vector for your self-actualization, and the moment they stop delivering on that front, you can kick them to the curb.
Yeah.
There's no sense of mutual solidarity. There's no sense of being in it for the long haul. There's no commitment to anything which is bigger than yourself necessarily, except in this very transactional sense of it delivering goods for you. And the moment that starts to falter, or it goes through a rough patch for any reason, you're wholly entitled to sever the contract and go and look for it somewhere else. It's an incredibly consumerist paradigm. But I argue that the issue with that is that we no longer live in the age of economic abundance, which underpinned and gave rise to that marriage ideology. It's just, except for the wealthiest, who are just rich enough to survive divorce and to have their children come out, only mildly fucked up rather than deeply fucked up. For everybody else who's further down the food chain, divorce and single parenthood is an absolute catastrophe for a great many of the women who go through it, because it's almost always the women who end up with care of the children. And the feminization of poverty, quote unquote, is directly downstream of the breakdown of families.
Yeah, it comes back to it again, the luxury beliefs idea. Rob was here this morning.
Yes.
And it just bears repeating again. The best thing that I've learned from you, and you taught me it before your book was even out, the rules that are made by the upper classes are luxury beliefs that don't impact them. They impact the poorest women and the poorest families and the poorest children. So it is one straight line from chivalry is good and you should hold the door open for women that you don't know as you go in and out of a hotel, right down to you shouldn't beat your wife. Like, it is a single straight, very slippery slope that gets slipperier the closer that you get to the bottom. Yeah,
and what manifests as holding a door open at the top of the food chain might, if you're lucky as a woman, manifest at the bottom of the food chain as intervening when you see a woman being assaulted on a tube platform. And the more you attack the holding the door open, the less likely you are as a sole traveller in late at night, who can't afford to get a taxi, to have somebody come to your aid if you find yourself being attacked on a tube platform alone.
Yeah, well, and again, obviously, if you've got a denial of sex differences, well, why does the man need to step in?
Just so. As though the upper body strength and the physical weight and the height and all of those things had all suddenly been magically flattened by the fact that we're talking to each other on computer screens.
Yeah, I was talking to Douglas about this yesterday, that gentleman who's currently about to be on trial in New York for choking a guy out that was, I think, dragging him.
It sounds as though he's going to be acquitted, but that was an insane trial. That was an insane effort to lynch somebody who was obviously doing a public service.
But think about how many people now, in the interim, while this case is still an open loop, and maybe even after, if he gets acquitted, he's acquitted.
Yes, the tutelary effect for any man tempted to intervene in a public situation like that is a disaster.
Fucking scary.
Yeah.
I don't want to be Me Too'd or the next George Floyd case or any of that stuff.
Exactly. It's an absolute disaster.
Yeah, it's scary. What's your thoughts on the surrogacy industry?
I think it should be banned, all of it.
Banned?
Yeah. Across the board. I don't think surrogacy should be a thing.
Why?
Little babies need their mothers. And mothers are not a woman is not a factory. Gestation is not a process of manufacturing to produce a product which can then be handed over willy-nilly to another carer. Pregnancy doesn't just create a baby. Pregnancy creates a mother. Pregnancy rewires your brain. It transforms you through a series of you get sort of hormone bathes for 9 months over the course of that. Your body changes, your breasts change, everything about you changes it completely reorients you towards
ready to receive baby.
and to receive baby and to prioritize the care of baby. So in a sense, you're this is not just true across the human species, it's true across countless animal species. You're primed for attachment and you're primed for attunement to your child. Of course, this is not to say that this is not to say that adoptive parents don't do a brilliant job, and there are countless adoptive parents who do wonderful jobs and care wonderfully for their adopted children. However, everybody accepts that a motherless child is off to a weaker start than a child born into a loving home with their mother and father, and there's a reason for that, and it's because the attunement that basic biological level of attunement and attachment that's primed through the process of pregnancy is essential from birth onwards to laying the absolute foundations of what it means to be an integrated person, and to say, and I think it's just profoundly morally wrong to say we should create a new life with the express intention of severing that bond at birth because somebody, just for the sake of adult desires. I think that's profoundly inverting the duty of care that we owe to dependent infants. We should be prioritizing their needs, not ours.
Did you see the episode I did with Dr. Anna Machin about Life of Dad and about how, so this, I'll send it to you. It's so good. So she looked at the role of fathers kind of throughout all of a child's upbringing to they leave the home, and talked about how I think that one of her pregnancies was particularly difficult, and then she and the child had been taken away after the birth, which was successful, and she was okay. And the dad was just left in there. No one even came up to him, and he just thought that like mum could be dead, child could be dead, and no one ever spoke to him about it. All of the pre-child classes, I don't know what they're called, all of them are focused on mum. Mum's the one that's going to give birth. It's her body that goes through the stress, etc., etc. But she said fathers can deal with like post-child depression. What's it called?
Postpartum.
Thank you. Postpartum depression. Dads can get that. There's this really, really common issue that fathers encounter, which I saw firsthand, and then she talks about in the book, which is that wife is pregnant. Future dad-to-be knows that wife is pregnant, 6, 7, 8, 9 months deep. Dad doesn't feel like he cares about child. Dad doesn't have any change in paternal instinct. Dad doesn't have any cascade.
The bond develops after birth for dads. It develops. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of evidence.
But they feel guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And I was sat in this, I remember where I was sat in Austin with this room, like 100 millionaire, billionaire, millionaire, 100 millionaire, like big hitters all the way around this room. And it was one of these, guys, if anyone's got anything that they want a bit of advice on, we've got a room of people that are pretty capable in here and you can say what you want. This dude was like, wife's 8 months pregnant, don't think I'm going to love the kid. What do I do? And dude sat across from him was like, give it 6 months after the birth, everything will change. But that fear and the guilt and the shame, and can I tell my partner, does this mean I don't love my partner? Does this mean I'm going to be a terrible father? All of these things, like that one insight from that episode, I haven't had so many tags and messages from guys in a really long time. Because I thought I was broken. I thought I was defective, or I am going through this right now. My wife is X months pregnant, or the child is 3 months old. I'm like, I just feel nothing for this kid. And it just takes longer for men. Okay, so now bringing it back to surrogacy. So now imagine that instead of it being the dad who takes that long to develop the bond with the child, now it's both parents. Because neither parent has been through the biological priming process of pregnancy. Wow.
Now imagine. Now I can't prove that this is going to impact on the life of a newborn baby, but I would bet you any money that it will. Yeah. And I think it's just profoundly wrong to take that immediate love of motherhood away from, to intentionally deprive a child of that in the name of adult desire. I just think that's profoundly morally wrong, and we shouldn't be allowing it.
I think I saw a video. I was told about a video of one of the Kardashians.
Yes, one of the Kardashians who was very open about this, and she procured a child by surrogacy.
Procured.
Yeah, it's human trafficking, Chris. It's human trafficking.
Just using your own genetics.
Yeah, it's human trafficking using sometimes your own genetics. So she procured a baby via surrogacy and was very open about the fact that she really struggled to bond with the baby. And I was thinking, so okay, like, well, we can all empathize with you, maybe, but like, can we just think about what the baby's going through here? This is a newborn baby who needs to be surrounded by love and responded to with care and nursed whenever it needed, picked up and held whenever he or she needs it. And both parents are struggling to bond both parents are feeling nothing, and both parents.
There's enough nannies around to, just pick it up, give it to the nanny. The nanny will continue to pick it up.
Yeah, and I inside reading that, I just wept for the baby who was still not being centered in the story.
Yes.
Even as Kardashian was talking about how she was about her emotional journey, even then the child was not being centered in the story.
Yeah.
And I just think it's profoundly upside down. We owe a duty of care to the most dependent of all and the most vulnerable of all, which is our babies. And every time we prioritize our own desires over those of our babies, we're failing in that duty of care.
What do you mean by Matt Walshism? What's that? Tell me about Matt Walshism. I don't normally pick named fights with people. But when I talk about Matt Walshism, this is a frustration I have sometimes with certain elements on the right, and this sort of anti-feminist right, if you like, and this really comes down to where my arguments come from, which is about material conditions and feminism emerging out of the technological transformations, first of the industrial era and later of the cyborg era, and my argument that really we have to look at where we are in terms of the material and the technological conditions which are producing these challenges that we now face. And sometimes I find myself frustrated with those elements on the right who seem to think that everything about modern life can stay the same except what women do, and then everything will be fine. Give me an example.
So for example, it's let me think of an example. That everything that's wrong in the dating culture would be fixed if women would just stop being whores. That's a very crude example, but it's a sentiment that I hear. Women just need to stop being whores and everything will be fine. And I'm like, well, okay, but does that mean you're going to stop shagging around? Does that mean you're going to stop having contracepted sex with random women? Does that mean you're going to stop watching porn? Does that mean, so many, so many of these quote unquote trad men have semi-public porn habits, and are completely indiscriminate about liking sort of ethos accounts on Instagram, whilst simultaneously inveighing against trad women, displaying more than a few square inches of skin on the internet. And I'm thinking, will you look at yourselves for a minute? Yeah. If we're going to have chastity, can we have fucking chastity across the board? I'm all for more chastity, but let's all be in the party, please. And if it really is just about everything staying the same except what women do, then to me it's the right wing equivalent of thumb sucking. It's just failing to look at any of the deeper structural drivers of some of the difficulties that we face, and just retreating back into it's just the fault of those nasty women. Yeah. And sometimes it is the fault of those nasty women, but not always, and it's never just us. Yeah,
that's interesting. And to think about that, you got some rule of thumb about how every political movement, when it becomes mainstream, is reduced to its most idiotic possible version.
Yes, the most imbecilic possible version of it.
Yeah.
Well, is guaranteed to be the one that goes mainstream.
Well, it's just the path of least resistance of memes, right?
Yeah. The more reductive something becomes, the more reductive it becomes.
I had a conversation for 2 hours today about memes, and the number of times that we quoted meme first, explain later. Like the stickiness arms race of a lot of this stuff causes people to be able to get ineffectual ideas across with good branding and good advertising and good marketing. And I think that definitely a lot of the stuff that's coming out with regards to mating and dating advice is a lot of the time that it's things that on the surface sounds triggers all manner of different biases, whether it be your sort of tribalism against the other party, the other sex, whether it's the path of least resistance that you're looking for. Like there's a whole host of different reasons why people end up arriving at the particular conclusions that they do.
But the more it gets boiled down to a set of just doctrinal talking points, the more useless it becomes. I don't really want to get into incel discourse because it's actually not a terrain I'm massively familiar with. But every so often I hear these talking points which are trotted out pretty much kind of without any context or without any sense of qualification. Like the one about, 20% of the men are getting 80% of the women.
Stop saying that. I haven't said that for 2 years.
No. I'm not saying you. I'm not saying you.
I'm just putting it out there.
But people trot it out as though it's just gospel truth. And I look around, or like, you know, women won't date somebody who's less than 6 feet tall. And I'm like, hello, do you have eyes? Do you ever go outside? Yeah. You know,
this is the terminally online issue, right? And again, both of us are, and this isn't me lambasting the people that are terminally online. It's me saying that if you are kind of the same way.
I'm terminally online.
Yeah, but the way that the sniper tries to adjust, okay, so the wind is blowing 15 knots east to west. Okay, so I adjust how I perceive what the target is. Like, if you spend this much time online, so Louise has this theory about yourself, right, that I'll give you, which is that you've got a barbell strategy, which is like extremism online and extremism touching grass. And like never the twain shall meet, and the grey area is where you go to die, right? This dark playground where you kind of like, I think her husband calls it good screen, bad screen. It's like I've spent enough time on bad screen today, which is work and emails, so I get some good screen time tonight, which is watching Netflix or whatever. Yeah. But ultimately, you're still within the confines of the game. And I, you know, said this a ton of times. The most egregious stories online are the ones that garner the most attention. And people who don't ever spend any time not being online use those as an indication of what the real world is like. But they forget that those stories are selected for precisely because they're insane. The man leaves the house, comes back, and the wife slept with the postman and the postman's dog, and now he's, you know, left to die under a bridge with a diabetic foot and gluten intolerance or something like that. That story's insane, which is why it garners so much opinion and also so much attention. And you don't know if it's true. And even if it is true, it's probably unrepresentative.
Here's a fine example of that from actually not the dating discourse, but just to illustrate the point. Yeah, there was a video that did the rounds the other day. Somebody compiled some Zoomers wearing ridiculous clothes and made a little video compilation of Zoomers wearing absurd outfits and put it out on the internet saying, you know, the Zoomers are beyond redemption, or some caption like that. You probably saw the video. And they look stupid. Sure, I mean, I looked stupid when I was 19 as well. I wore ridiculous clothes, and I was I looked at this and I thought, and then later I watched this video, and then later that day I drove through Cambridge, which is extremely full of young people. Like it's very, very Zoomer dense environment, Cambridge, because I had to go there for something or other. And I was looking along the streets. I was thinking, is this, 20-something, early 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, one after another walks past me wearing just normal clothes. And I was looking at them thinking, no, you're not sartorially beyond redemption. You're just wearing normal clothes.
Yeah, where's the cat ears?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the cat ears and the absurd kind of, non-binary get-up and the stilts.
Technicolor dream coat.
And the 18-inch platforms and whatever the hell else was in this stupid video. Yeah. And I was thinking, no, literally somebody's just gone and compiled the most extreme and egregious, stupid clothing that some 18-year-olds were wearing, and have tried to generalize that to everybody. And that's just what the internet does, as you say. But when you apply that to the relationship discourse, then you end up in a situation where people, especially people who are not making much of an effort for whatever reason to reality test this against what's actually happening out there, are really struggling and are finding themselves sort of circling the drain a bit with in terms of their assumptions and expectations.
One of my friends referred to it as shadow boxing an imaginary hegemon. Fucking like beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? That you have this thing that doesn't exist, that you're somehow compensating for and interacting with, despite the fact, again, it isn't there. And it exists like in this ineffable place that everyone kind of perceives and no one ever sees, except for in this sort of virtual world, which then impacts the way that you show up. And then you get, culture and counterculture occurs to, okay, well, fuck it. Like, I'm going to become a furry or whatever because I've seen it on the internet and I know that it pisses off the right wing, or I'm going to become a gun-toting MAGA Republican because I know that it pisses off the, all the way down. So, yeah, it's...
I give thanks every day for the fact that I have to show up at the same time every afternoon for the school run pickup queue.
Why?
I mean, it's not physically touching grass, but it does that.
Socially touching grass.
I spend all day like Bluetoothed into the rage machine, and then I go and pick up my daughter from school, and I'm like, yes, actually, and breathe out.
Yeah,
none of it is real.
Everyone in M&S.
Twitter actually is real life, but it's also not real life, and it's important to remind yourself of the ways in which it's not true.
I think there should be, for every 1 hour that you spend on the internet, you should have to spend 60 seconds in the George at Asda clothing department, like just to be like, these are the fucking normal people again.
You say that. I was really interested, to notice in Sainsbury's, as in George, as in Marks and Spencer's, that long-sleeved maxi dresses have been all the rage for some time now.
Okay.
And I don't know if I can.
Is that one of
anything.
the four horsemen of the sartorial apocalypse?
I don't know. This is the thing, but I've been noticing it, and I'm thinking, are we going to have is this just a sign of economic downturn? Is it just that, but because this is well documented, the hemlines go up as the economy grows, and is it just the fact that the women are sensing the coming economic crisis?
Well,
I don't know, or is it the sexual counter-revolution, or is it neither? Is it actually just a fashion? I don't know.
Certainly know that,
but I've really noticed the trend.
Self-objectification from women is correlated with wealth inequality in the local ecology. So that's an interesting one. Women seem to self-objectify and sexually objectify themselves. So it was Candice Blake's study on the posting of sexy selfies, and her justification for it in terms of a mechanism was that it shows women not only how high they could climb, but how far they could fall with a partner. And when you see those two things side by side, it's run away from a life you don't want and run toward a life that you do. And that causes just something comes online and it's like, I will wrangle myself a husband, like activate breasts. And you do that through the sort of selfies that you do. And it was some insane volume, like millions of posts that they looked at to find these correlations on the internet. And yeah, that wealth inequality. So I definitely don't disagree that, especially female behavior, but also male behavior too, can be impacted by local ecology, especially wealth inequality, GDP. I mean, we saw no one ever really spoke about this. I was waiting for a study to come out, and someone may still do it. I thought that casual sex was going to drop after COVID due to pathogen fear from women, right? Women have got a much lower threshold for disgust sensitivity, quite rightly, because they're more at risk of bearing some sort of burden. And given that we had just talk of disease and infection and virus and so on and so forth for a very long time, I thought that we were going to find a big after effect of that. It just turns out that all of the then 3-year-olds, now 6-year-olds are like can't read and have absolutely zero social skills because they've had a mask over the face for the last 3 years.
Well, speaking as the mother of a 7-year-old, that's actually not observed. That's not the case amongst my daughter's cohort.
That's good.
You'll be pleased to know.
That's good.
Yeah, they all seem actually to be fairly normal and well-adjusted kids.
The reading age, or the reading levels, for sure. I think across the, if you look at some of the studies that have been done, don't bode particularly well. It seems
what is absolutely clear is that there's a stark economic divide. And the further down the food chain you are economically, the harder hit your children were. For understandable reasons. Whether it's because you had limited social capital or were struggling, or were in a chaotic family, or simply had to work, irrespective of lockdown. And there your kids are home and there's just nobody to watch them. For 1,001 different reasons, it's been absolutely disastrous for poorer children, to a degree which I think is unforgivable and shouldn't be forgiven.
Yeah. What are you most obsessed by as subcultures go, or what are you going to be focused on over the next couple of months? Is there anything that's particularly caught your eye?
Actually, what I'm reviewing a leftist sociological academic text at the moment, which is kind of awful. It's called The Women of the Far Right. And I'm very interested in it as a text written by the left about the right. But I'm also interested in it documents. It's a kind of progressive sociological study of some alt-right female vloggers from sort of 2016 to 2019, including Lauren Southern. Okay. And it's kind of badly written, and it's kind of dated, but it's also interesting as a phenomenon. So I'm kind of, but really this is just a preamble. So one of the things I'm interested in and thinking about and really sort of grappling with is the ambivalent position of women within the larger conservative or right-wing dissident movement. Because it is ambivalent, because there are a great many right-wing men out there who really are virulently misogynistic, and who genuinely just think women are not people. And yet, there are a great many women out there who look at the sort of the emerging kind of doctrinaire orthodoxy of the kind of the mad left, if you know what I mean by the mad left, and who just say this is not for me. And so there's a great many women who are kind of between those two poles and who are genuinely quite politically homeless. And it's something I think about a lot. I don't really have any firm conclusions or strong reflections on that, except to say that this is a real phenomenon. And I don't know. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, it sort of fits into a larger kind of reflection, I suppose, on digital cultures and where we are in the discourse. Because it feels as though a great many of the trends which sort of erupted in the sort of 2015, 2016, with kind of, the Trumpageddon and all the rest of it, have kind of run their course now. A lot of those sort of quote unquote dissident subcultures have now pretty much percolated into the mainstream. There's a whole new set of talking heads who are now pretty much, I mean, even Bronze Age Pervert has been doxxed and is now on his foodie arc, which is just hilarious.
So
like, where do we go from here? Because it seems like all that's left in the subculture is just this increasingly unhinged discourse about dating. And I'm 44 and I've been married for 10 years, so like I've got nothing to add to that. So like, I mean, maybe I should just hang up my boots and go and do something else. And I mean, maybe I'll start a bakery, or maybe there's.
And you and Bronze Age Pervert can start the Bronze Age Bakery. Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the reasons why everyone is always so interested in talking about the dating world is that it permits everybody to have an opinion, both those who participate and those who do not. Like, if you don't know how fucking the NFL league goes, like, what have you got to tell me about how Travis Kelce should like change his like QB game or something like that? It doesn't matter. Whereas for dating, people do. Right. People do have an idea of that. And because I remember when I was working in nightlife, one of my jobs was to do, I'm okay at copywriting. So I would write the copy for a lot of the social media posts. My business partner would do a lot more of the accounts and kind of back office stuff. No one went up to him, looked over his shoulder, and gave him shit about the way that his spreadsheets looked. But everyone has a social media account, so everyone's a fucking expert. So everybody had, oh mate, I wouldn't have posted that at that time. Well, that's not the hashtag that I would have used. I thought I would definitely think that you could have done it this way. I'm like, all right, well, like if you're going to scrutinize me, scrutinize the fucking
spreadsheet guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it never happened. And I think that, there's a few things that it's why diet is such a breeding ground for people to argue, because everyone's got to eat, right? Everybody has an idea about how, and it's death denialism as well. Like, no, I'm going to live longer than you. My veganism is going to beat your carnivorism and blah, 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 blah. And ultimately, it just fucking comes down to people wanting to be able to espouse their opinions whilst being insulated from the impacts of them. One
optimistic read we could put on that might be that, if we're all still fixated on the relations between men and women, that I think that's a testament of sorts to the fact that the war on relationships is never going to triumph completely. Men and women do still want to be together, and they're
going to try and continue to thrash out this.
Even if they're kind of mud wrestling horribly at the moment, at least on the internet. And again, Twitter is not real life, even though it kind of is real life. And I just have to trust that somewhere out of this messed up discourse, there
maybe
are lots
an
of
answer that's fucking useful.
And also that there are lots of perfectly nice and well-adjusted young men and women who are finding one another and forming nice relationships. That just don't go anywhere near Twitter.
When I
just have to assume that that's also true.
One of the most like sanity reinforcing periods of my year is when I go home for Christmas and I'm at mum and dad's house and the Gruffalo comes on, right? And I watch the Gruffalo and I think, who's this made for? This is made for families that are sat together around the fire, whether you be shopping at Waitrose or shopping at Lidl. Like, that's what it's built for, and it works across the board.
It's a great story. I know it pretty much by heart, I think.
Gruffalo's a solid story. Or, like the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse, right? Like, just stuff like that. And it always makes me, maybe it's just because Christmas is a kind of wistful, whimsical time of year that makes everyone happy. But that's like my media equivalent of touching grass. I think that's one of the most grass-like watching experiences. So what is this built to engender, right? It's like just very calming, what's that one with the dragon?
Zog.
Yes, thank you. It always rhymes.
Yeah.
Which must be a nightmare to script. But yeah, all of those things. And I'm like, 35-year-old childless man watches children's TV. This is another warning. So this is smiling at toddlers on a walk, isn't it? But yeah, I happily watch that, and it gives me, that's the stuff that my post-content clarity of that is like everything's all right, I think.
I honestly do think we're going to be all right. I sincerely believe that it doesn't matter how hard we try and demolish our nature, it will always find a way back. I genuinely believe that, even if, as Louise sometimes worries, our culture is so structurally antinatalist that we're just going to end up self-selecting against ourselves to the point that we just render ourselves extinct.
Yeah.
But that it doesn't follow from that all humans are going to go extinct. It'll just be the ones from this culture.
It's a selection effect.
Yeah, and so some humans somewhere will survive, and it'll be the ones who figured out how to unplug from the Skinner machine and go back to having kids. But we like, one way or another, like that subset of the culture which survives will be the one that figures out how to get past this kind of messed up point that we're in. But some part of it will survive. I think we're going to be all right.
That's the white pill that I want to finish on. Mary Harrington, ladies and gentlemen, where should people go? They want to keep up to date with all the things that you're doing, and what can they expect off you over the next few months?
I write regularly at Unheard. My Substack is Reactionary Feminist. You can find me on Twitter at Moving Circles.
Hell yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode with Mary, you will love my full-length conversation with Louise Perry. Go on. Give it a press.